What was the creepiest or most paranormal thing that's ever happened to you? If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. I had a span of time where multiple things happened to me. Not much since, I am in college now, but here it goes. Here are a few stories, some are related, and all happened at the same house. When I was in 6th grade, my friend was over my house and we were taking turns playing the PlayStation. I was lying on my bed as it was his turn. The lights were out, and it was about midnight at this time. As I'm laying there, I notice from my left peripheral that there is someone there. I see a face, all white face with blacked out eyes and quite similar to what Michael Myers' mask looks like, but no hair. This face started to slowly turn in and look at me, getting closer and closer. I jumped up quickly and turned the light on, and then there was nothing. I was freaked out for the rest of that night. A few years later, I believe I was in high school, I was playing Xbox and my mom was sitting on the computer. I was playing COD Zombies and she was playing a dice game, so I can be certain this wasn't from that. Both of us heard this very loud man say, "I'm home," so I'm home but dragged out. We both just looked at each other wondering what the hell just happened. Later that night, my mom was in her room just petting one of our cats. As she was petting him, she was just saying, "Hi Vadi, his name is Vader." After she said this, she said that someone mimicked back to her hi, almost as if she was being mocked. A few months later, once Halloween approached, we had seen something else. We had our house all decorated and it looked pretty scary. Scary enough that I decided to use my uncle's camera to take a picture of our house. Upon further inspection of the picture, I noticed something quite scary. I zoomed in on our door. We have a glass door that opens first before the main door, and saw within the glass a face. It had human characteristics, however the eyes were blacked out, very similar to the thing I saw when I was younger. My family visited me and I had my uncle bring his camera. Here's the image. We had 2 tiki torches and 1 outdoor light. Other than that, there were no other light sources. I have been waiting to tell this story for ages. No one believes me, but my sister remembers it just as vividly as I do. I'm 32 now and this happened when I was 13. I grew up in the backwoods of Texas. I'm talking, there was a huge forest behind our acre of land, and it belonged to the National Preserve, that kind of backwoods. Well, my sister, who was 8 at the time, wanted to go walking in the woods, something we did frequently. Somehow we always knew where we were, even if we walked for an hour. We always knew how to get back home. It was weird, but I digress. We yell that we're going in the woods, and my mom yells back at us to come in before dark, yada yada parent stuff, before we set off. We had built a makeshift fort a few hundred feet in and decided to check it out. We got bored of that pretty quick and decided to just walk and pick up sticks, etc. We're a good 30 minutes into our walkabout when I notice it's getting darker. I start to ignore it when my sister hits my arm. Up ahead through the dense foliage and trees we see what looks like a clearing. Now I knew this part of the woods well, and I knew we were still on preserved land and there weren't any clearings that should be nearby. Thinking maybe it's just the sunlight illuminating a spot, I convinced my sister to check it out. It turned out to be a clearing. The sky was still pretty dark and the wind had picked up to a breeze because I remember the tall grass rustling. However, we had stopped in our tracks because in the middle of the clearing was a 2-story house. There was no driveway nor a road that led to it. That's the first thing we checked as we went around the perimeter of the clearing. We were a bit terrified of the house and thought maybe we had gotten lost and there was a road nearby, but as I said, nothing. There wasn't even a worn path to the house. We went back to the original spot we came out of the woods from and just stared. I remember being full of absolute dread, but I couldn't seem to turn back and go home. The house itself looked old but well kept, but there was no road. My sister's holding my hand at this point and we're still just standing there staring. It's starting to get darker and darker. Then my eyes go to one window on the top right part of the house. There's a flickering light on and there's something rocking back and forth. It blots out the light when it rocks one way, but then when it rocks the other way you can see the light. My sister then squeezes my hand so tight my fingers went numb. That jarred me out of my stupor and I tell her to let go and look down at my hand, trying to shake her off. That's when she starts crying and says it's waving hi. I remember I literally started shaking at that point. I look up and sure enough there's an arm up now rocking opposite of the body in a wave-like gesture. I was done at that point and pull her hand that's still clawing mine and hightail it out of there. We run a good 10 minutes before making it to our fort, which confused the hell out of me. We had walked a lot further. The sky was starting to get brighter, but I still wanted to get out. We caught our breath and then began running again until we got home. My sister and I had stopped crying by this point, but my mom, who I swear to God had some kind of mind-reading powers, asked what was wrong. My sister tells her and I get in trouble for making up stories and scaring her. I storm off and we just ignore it after that. I remember it occasionally throughout the years, and every time I remember it I get a sense of dread and nearly start shaking. Fast forward to 2 years ago. My dad passed away and I'm at my mom's house consoling her and grieving as well with her and my sister. Randomly we start talking about how my dad loved horror movies, etc., and I remember that day in the woods so vividly I nearly start shaking again. Later that night after my mom's asleep I ask my sister about it. As soon as I say that house in the woods she immediately freezes up. I ask her if and what she remembers and she describes it in exact details as I remember it. Then she said she had asked our dad a few years back about it, since he grew up here as well and knew more about the area's history. He laughed at her saying there's nothing back there but woods for miles. Yet her and I both remembered it so vividly it feels like it just happened every time we remember it. The next day I decide to go back into the woods and check it out. I spent half a day out there and found absolutely nothing but woods. To this day I still can't explain what the hell we saw. Not paranormal, but extremely creepy and unsettling. My husband, kid, and I live out in the middle of nowhere on a plot of land that's about 100 acres. I'd say probably 95 of those acres are wilderness with ATV and hiking trails that we, and several of the previous owners, created by exploring. We use that land for camping, hiking, and hunting. We like to find a spot, clear it a bit, and camp overnight. There's so much space we've never stayed in the same place twice. We've seen some kill sites, both old and fresh. Lots of animal tracks, places where deer bed down, etc. I've even spent a lot of time hiking solo while the kid is in school and husband's at work. Whether alone or with the family, we always carry a firearm for protection. A few weeks ago, we decided to load up our camping gear and start a new trail. We mark the trails we make with spray paint on trees. We were pretty far in the woods, having hiked almost an hour when the atmosphere seemed to change. I don't know who noticed it first, but my husband, who was leading the three of us, turned around and gave me a concerned look. The birds had stopped chirping, the insects were quiet. There were no sounds around us. When in the woods, complete quietness is rarely a good thing. We continued onward, hyper aware of our surrounds while our kid continued merrily talking. We came to the stream that marks the midway point of our property. We stopped for a few minutes, my husband and I in a stare down with each other. We both felt something was off but didn't want to scare our daughter. I finally broke the silence and said I suddenly didn't feel good and that we should go home. My husband nodded in agreement while our daughter voiced her protest. Too bad, kiddo. We turned around and started back. After going a few hundred yards, still in silent wilderness, I looked to my right and saw a person crouched down in a ghillie suit about 150 feet off our trail. I'm positive they saw that I noticed them, but they never moved. I cleared my throat to get my husband's attention, and when he looked back, I put my hand on the gun in the holster on my hip, which caused him to readjust his rifle in preparation of anything. I sped up my family and we hurried back home. I told my husband as soon as we were inside. We decided to call the police and report the trespasser. Filed a report and was told to call again if we saw anyone. A few days later, my husband and I went out alone and set up a bunch of deer cams. We didn't go back out into the woods for maybe a week, then he and I ventured out to retrieve the cam footage. Out of the 9 cams we placed, we caught a person in a ghillie suit in 2 images. We handed copies over to the cops to go with our report. We haven't gone back out since except to check the deer cams. Haven't gotten any other trespassers. It freaks me out even more to think of the few times, while camping, that we heard walking near our tent in the middle of the night. We always assumed it was curious animals, but now I'm not so sure. Creepy for me, I was having a tense conversation with someone that I was close to years ago. The conversation quickly devolved into a passive-aggressive fight that ended with the other person getting in the car and driving away. As I started heading back inside, the other person came back, got out of the car, and started our conversation again. The tone of voice was totally different and the stance was different and the feeling in the air was completely off. I don't know how else to explain it. As the conversation progressed, the other person started saying some nasty and mean things that were completely out of character. I said, "This isn't like you, person." They said, "What makes you think that I'm person?" I remember continuing the conversation and talking to the person for a long time, but I don't remember anything specific. I do remember becoming more and more alarmed and knowing something wasn't right. Finally, I told the person to go home. They complied and left. I went back inside and started telling my sibling about the situation when the doorbell rang. Maybe 2 to 3 minutes had passed. It was the person coming back to apologize for the original fight. They had been driving around town for a long time and didn't want to go home, leaving things unresolved. I asked why they had said some of the things from the last conversation and they looked at me like I was crazy. They had no idea what I was talking about. Totally could have been lying, but that whole situation just felt dark. Scared the hell out of me. I was driving to pick up my friend from the airport around 10 at night. His girlfriend was also with me as she wanted to see him as soon as possible. We were going down some dark, super lonely back road. I've never been that way before, but I was following good old Apple Maps. Eventually we came up alongside a train that was matched with our speed, so we couldn't see out past it on the right side of the car. After a couple minutes of that, we came upon a train yard on our left. A very spooky, very generic horror movie train yard. Nothing crazy yet, except for the fact that it went on and on and on. We probably spent 10 minutes driving at 45 miles an hour down a dark back road with a train yard on our left and a train on our right blocking the view. Eventually we made it back into society and picked up my friend from the airport. We told him all about the spooky train yard and train and were excited to drive back and show him just how much it was like a generic horror film. We drove back down the same roads. It wasn't there. We never passed a train yard. There were no trains on the tracks, now on our left. Friend's girlfriend and I flipped out. We swore up and down we drove right along the train yard for a long time. The drive home felt much shorter. I was 15-ish and babysitting a neighbor girl down the road from my parents' house. The house was older, but I never thought it was creepy. They also had this awful rat terrier that would bark at everything, worst dog ever. Once the girl went to bed, I sat in the living room and was watching TV. The dog started freaking out, but instead of barking at the door like normal, she started barking at the corner of the room. Then she would run to another room and bark and come back to where I was like she was following something. Finally she stayed at the kitchen barking for a solid 2 minutes. Afraid that she was going to wake the girl up, I went into the kitchen to quiet her down. When I walked in I froze and saw that every single cabinet door in the kitchen was open. All of them. I grabbed the dog and ran to the living room. After she stopped barking, I went back into the kitchen and closed everything. Thankfully the dad finally came home soon after. I refused to go back and my parents never believed me. I still get freaked out when I think about it. Somewhat ironically something happened to me last night. I got home from work very early in the morning, 2:30 a.m. My house has an entryway or mudroom before you actually get into the house. I open the front door, step inside, close front door and proceed to try and find the key to get through the next door to get into my house. So the only light in this entryway is through the glass on the front door, the rest of the room is completely black and I can barely see my hands in front of my face. All of a sudden I start to hear this, buzzing/vibrating? Noise behind me off to the right. House is old so maybe just weird house noises. Still looking for the key when I notice that the noise is getting louder, closer, and it has risen in pitch to something like if a woman was humming loudly. Maybe it's just ringing in my ear. Out of the corner of my eye I see a shadow that I thought was from light reflecting outside, move towards me creeping along the wall. That's when I noticed the vibrating noise was also getting closer to me and it seemed to be coming in the same direction as the now moving shadow. I'm shitting my pants trying to open this damn door and when I finally do the noise stops, the shadow disappears and I'm hoping it was all in my head. I lived in an old house, converted into a duplex, in Athens, Ohio, which is reported to be one of the most haunted American cities. During the first year I lived in my apartment, I frequently noticed this strange music that seemed to be coming from inside the house. It's hard to describe, but it sounded like a keyboard or an organ. It sounded faint and was played in the minor key. Always sounded the same. Regardless, I just chalked it up to my downstairs neighbors, and it never bothered me enough to investigate. It was definitely coming from inside our building. The following year, my original neighbors moved out, and my new neighbor, Sarah, moved in. We became friends. One night, she was hanging out in my apartment and the music started up. She asked me pointedly where the music was coming from, and I said I didn't know she didn't have music playing in her apartment. She said no and we both looked at each other uneasily. Sarah asked me if I ever saw or heard weird things, and I said that other than the music, I hadn't. The way she asked implied that she had, but she didn't want to talk about it. A few months later, her BF moved in, and she later confided in me that she saw and heard things, specifically random tendrils of what looked like smoke swirling inside their bedroom. Doors slamming or opening without explanation. Her BF hated going to the basement so much that he'd sing the whole time he was down there to do laundry. I hated the basement too because it hadn't been changed much since the house had been built and there was a creepy room that looked like where you'd keep a sex slave. I guess it was where would have been stored. I always felt like I was being watched when I was down there. I graduated and was getting ready to move. I went out of town for a few days so my parents were watching my cat at their place a few hours away. The night I got back to Athens, I decided to start packing some of my books, the first items I'd packed. I fell asleep and woke up in the middle of the night to a giant crash. I was tired and disoriented, so I assumed the noise came from Sarah's place. The next morning, I went to my living room to find that a giant antique mirror hanging over my fireplace had crashed and shattered into hundreds of pieces. The nails supporting the mirror were intact, still in the wall. After that, I was finally prepared to admit that the place was haunted. I know Sarah saw and heard way more than she ever admitted, but she didn't like talking about it because she still lived there. She moved recently, so maybe I'll get more out of her now. I never really believed in ghosts, but too many unexplainable things happened. I never felt unsafe or like whatever was in the house wanted to hurt me or express anger, except maybe at my moving. This story isn't even that interesting, but that's how I found a lot of people's ghost stories to be. Not everyone has some vindictive poltergeist or whatever. I did do some cursory research into who owned the house. I learned a woman was the original owner. Back then, the house was for a single family. She sounded like a quiet woman, a widow who died at an old age. In her obituary, I learned she loved to play music and had founded the Athens Music Appreciation Group. I wonder if I kept hearing her favorite song to play. At a nursing home, working 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. First, I took care of 16 ladies as a CNA on night duty, on my own. The halls have 16 rooms, with a sister hall, same layout, next door, only separated by a sliding door. There's a nurse that oversees the 2 adjoining halls but never saw her much, so it got lonely. As it was a nursing home, the ladies who live there are older and can get really sick really fast. One lady was sent to the hospital for pneumonia and was gone 4 days. One night, around 3 a.m., another lady, same hall neighbor to the lady at the hospital, started screaming, "Get him out of my room." Thinking a male resident had wandered from the other side of the building, I ran over to her room. But I didn't see anything. Now, this is a lady who is very with it and never has behaviors or hollers out. But she is hysterical. I figure she had a bad dream and try to calm her down. It took about 15 minutes. When I leave her room, the nurse is on the phone. The lady at the hospital had died 15 minutes ago. There are ghosts that walk the halls, and dark forms I see in certain corners of certain halls. So I guess I was never really alone. This incident happened to my aunt and uncle, who are very straight-laced, wholesome Christian types. It was the mid-90s and they had just been married. They were looking for their fifth place together and were on a budget as both had just gotten out of college. They found an apartment that was affordable and made an appointment to check it out. When they arrived, they noticed the apartment building was adjacent to an old cemetery. The woman showing the place mentioned that previous tenants had mentioned strange activities in the apartment, drawers being open, doors slamming shut, but overall the incidents were few and infrequent. If you believe in that sort of thing. They didn't think much of it, and they weren't the spooky type, being Christians, and also they went ahead and got their first place. She said as soon as they got in the apartment they noticed things being moved, drawers opening and closing, items gone missing or moved. She said there were incidents almost daily, but that they just tried to ignore it. The third or fourth day they were in their new place, my aunt had just showered and had crawled in bed next to her hubby as he had showered before her. FYI, my uncle usually leaves the room when my aunt recounts this story as it's too creepy for him. So my aunt had just crawled into bed, my uncle was above the covers reading the paper. She was exhausted and closed her eyes to start relaxing before sleep. She says her husband then turns to her, not saying a word, and starts giggling and poking at her like a playful kid kind of thing, then starts grabbing her arms and legs, sort of play wrestling if you will. "What are doing?" she exclaimed, to which he didn't reply. She also said he had an odd look on his face that she'd never seen, and it was just out of character. He then rolled off the bed, manically giggling, and rolled under the bed and started pushing up on the box spring from under the bed. She described it as almost taunting. Then in a loud voice she yells his name and asks again, "What are you doing?" She then hears my uncle's voice say, "What is it?" She hops up and finds her hubby in the living room, feet kicked up, reading his paper. They immediately packed a few things and went to a hotel. They never spent another night there and got out of the lease and only returned with family and friends to pack up. My older sister, I think in her mid to late 30s at the time, was screwing around with an Ouija board. My family has a history of screwing around with them and weird shit happening, so I've never touched them. I'm a massive skeptic to everything. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe my sister was full of shit. Feel free to say I'm making this shit up because it is very far-fetched. My sister might have been on drugs, doubtful, or maybe got some bad pot, but she wouldn't lie to me about this. So yeah. Story goes, I guess, that she was playing Ouija with her friends, and the board had spelled out some words that implied the entity on the Ouija board was a person trapped in hell, and that it needed their help getting out. It spelled out a first and last name and that this person needed to be stopped. Stop Jim Doe or find him or something. After they wrapped up their messing with the board, my sister made a note of what the person said and the name and stored it. As I said, our family has had weird coincidences around the board and have learned to write that shit down. Fast forward 3 or 4 days later and I get a phone call from my older sister and she's freaking out. She opened with something along the lines of, "I swear I'm not making this shit up. I know you're the only one in the family who won't think I'm nuts or that I'm lying when I tell you this," then went on to tell me the aforementioned story about the Ouija board and someone trapped in hell and needing them to stop this guy. Apparently she was reading the newspaper a few days after messing with the board and there was a small article about a car accident with a family and a drunk driver. Everyone in the incident died: family, a couple kids, husband and wife, and the drunk driver. The drunk driver's name, which as she said damn near made her spit out her coffee, was the name from the Ouija board that she wrote down. My best friend called me one night telling me his roommate was having a problem. We were all 18 to 19 at the time, in the days when people didn't really have cell phones. Brick Nokias at best. Some weird stuff had been mentioned to me, but it was stuff you could blame on neighbor kids, like banging on the outside walls that faced a field. His roommate's house was at the end of the road in a desert town, so closest neighbor was a football field away at least. Thinking someone was messing with them, I rallied the troops and we get there. This guy got the house from his grandfather and inherited an RV, the house, and a couple vehicles. Both of them looked sleepless, but not much happened at first. I was the tallest by far, being over 6 foot, and there was a ceiling drop-in right in the living room. I noticed it open a few times and closed it, but by the third time I had everyone try to reach it. There were 2 drop-ins and without a ladder, no one but me could reach them. About 1 a.m. we start hearing thuds on the wall facing the field. My friend says this is how it starts. One guy brought a shotgun for some reason, but we head out to state off whoever it was. All of us went, no one stayed in the house. I kept looking back at the housetop, make sure no one was sneaking up on us, but see what looked like someone in a hoodie standing in the middle of a big window in the master bedroom. I pointed it out and we all ran back up, catch the person. Only 2 ways into the house, both in the front. We split the group and went both ways around, no one came out. No door slams. No running. No one inside. Master bedroom is white walls, nothing hanging on the walls and closet closed. Nothing that could be a dark anything to deceive us. Other weird stuff happened, but the crazy one is the guy who owned the house went into the bathroom. After he left the living room, the drop-in opened in the living room, we heard his voice in the attic start laughing weirdly, and then a pipe wrench comes flying out. 3 of us run to the other drop-in, which is closed and no ladder. We heard some scuffling, so I reached up and scooted the drop-in open about a foot and nearly shit my pants looking at my friend's roommate's face staring at me with a very disturbing smile. I stumble back and he's gone. I went straight to the bathroom and opened the door to find this guy on the toilet taking a shit and had scared him in doing so. No entry into the attic from the bathroom, no windows in the bathroom. I can't explain it, and I'm not only one who saw these things. This actually happened to me. If you choose not to believe me, that's fine. I wouldn't expect you to, just don't be a dick about it. This all happened around late May to early June in 2017. I live out in Kentucky and have been here my whole life. I saved up some money and bought my first R-style rifle, Ruger AR-556, for anyone who cares. I had wanted one for a while but never had the money to get one, so as soon as I got a chance, I grabbed it. I needed to sight in my gun after I bought. My family owns 20 plus acres of land, so I don't go to gun ranges around here because, first of all, people are dumb and our local one has bullet holes in the ceiling, and second, I prefer shooting on our own land. I had managed to get a Magpul D60 drum magazine at Gander Mountain because they were having a going out of business sale, so I guess really I was going to sight in the gun and test out the magazine's reliability. I barely had the magazine out of the box and had not gotten a chance to shoot it yet, but I looked up a bunch of reviews and couldn't ever find one that had the problems mine did that day. This is where things start getting a bit odd. My family has owned this land I shoot on for decades. Nothing weird has ever happened out here, that I know of, and I have taken people to the spot this happened and nothing has recreated the feelings I had that day. I grabbed my gun, the drum, and 20 rounds of ammo and went outside to cross over to our field. To get to the field, I have to go through a barbed wire fence and about 300 foot of wooded area. The moment I crossed over the barbed wire, something felt off. I have been over there 1,000 times before, and like I said, nothing weird had ever happened down there and I have never had any weird experiences there. Something just felt off that day. Like something wanted me to leave. I kept going though because nothing had ever happened out here before. I just thought maybe I was being paranoid or the wind and air pressure were just right to give a eerie feeling. So I walk on deeper into the woods. The further I get, the stronger the feeling is. I feel like I'm being watched, like something nearby is just staring into my soul. I keep going. I get halfway and this feeling is borderline unbearable. I stop dead in my tracks and think to myself something is off. Like I've said 1,000 times, nothing like this has ever happened before. I know something is going on now. When I grabbed my ammo when I left home, I did not load it into the magazine because I wanted to hurry and get to the field so I could get everything set up. This is where I listened to that gut feeling. I stopped dead in my tracks and loaded the magazine with the 20 rounds I brought. Something told me that something wasn't right and I needed to be ready just in case. Something is watching me and I don't know what it is or where it is. As I am loading my magazine, out of nowhere I smell something dead. It just came out of nowhere. I had been standing there for 2 minutes with no scent, then all of a sudden, it smells like a month-old rotting carcass is beside me. I look around and directly behind me is a mangled animal, that aside from the smell, looks nearly fresh. It was so mangled, the only thing that gave me a clue as to what the animal is was the color of what was left of its fur, which was a white/gray color. It was a rabbit or possum. The smell did not go along with the age of this. Whatever I caught the stench of, that wasn't it. I finished loading the magazine, immediately stuck it in my gun, and held the bolt open that way if I tripped, my gun wouldn't fire accidentally. For some reason, I kept fucking going. I'm nearly out of the woods. I can see the field I'm going to dead ahead. That's when it happened. This entire time, I've been walking alongside a creek. The creek turns to the left as you approach the field I was going to. As I got to the turn in the creek, I heard a large splash in the water. I turned quickly and what I seen I'll never forget. This thing was easily 8 to 9 feet tall and stood on 2 legs. Aside from the water splash, it was dead silent. It had very long arms and long legs. It was a light brown color, almost the color of a deer. Updating this to say I got thinking about it the other day, I think it was much lighter brown than a deer. It still had a brownish look to it, but not that dark. Maybe it actually was gray and the lighting made it look a light shade of brown, but it looked like skin, not fur. Perhaps the freakiest thing about it was its size. It looked severely malnourished. Very skinny and tight skin across its body. Imagine taking a fully grown man that only weighs 120 pounds and stretching him out to be 9 feet tall, but he stays the same width and doesn't get skinnier as you stretch him out. It had somewhat of an odd walk too, but this could have been caused by the mud near the creek bed. It never faced me so I did not get a chance to see its front. It just kept walking and never turned around. This scared the absolute shit out of me. I was 99% sure I knew what this thing was. I tried to close the bolt on my gun to chamber a round just in case this thing turned around to fight. I had no intention of shooting this thing unless it gave a sign it was going to attack. If it was what I hunk it was, the gun wouldn't have done anything but piss it off anyway. When I tried to chamber a round, the magazine would not let go of the round. The force of the bolt closing would break your finger if you were to close it on your finger. I had been loading and unloading the magazine the day before to help loosen the spring to make it easier to load in the future. I could take the rounds out with my hand, but when I come across this fucking thing, somehow, it decides it wants to keep the fucking bullet. By now, the thing is gone and I'm basically sitting there with my dick in my hand. That magazine never worked right again. I kept it a few more days but had to send it back because it was tearing up my ammo. It would hold on to bullets so tight, the bolt tried to close and just scratched a gouge so deep in the casing, powder was almost leaking out. After it walked off, I realized if I had shot, I would have deafened myself. It caught me so off guard I almost fired a 5.56 round in a heavily wooded area without ear protection. I had brought some with me but didn't have it on. Now to answer some questions. What was it? To be honest, I have no fucking clue what it actually was. Me and a friend who knows more about this stuff than I do did some looking around and have narrowed it down. Skinwalker, Goat Man, or, what I'm afraid it is, a Wendigo. If you want a very good idea of what it looked like, look up the Wendigo from the game Until Dawn. Aside from the color, it is exactly what I saw. And before anyone thinks I am just describing the one from the game, I didn't even know about the game until after I had my encounter. When I seen the gameplay, it actually made me very uncomfortable because of how much it resembles what I saw. Everything I seen matched a Wendigo perfectly: stench of death, mangling animals to scare/intimidate humans, long arms, malnourished, tight skin, most are gray but I have heard about brown ones, except one thing, its behavior. They are supposed to be hyper-aggressive and basically kill anything they see or drag it off and eat it alive. So why didn't it get me? It had ample opportunity to but never did. Why did it walk off and turn its back toward me? I have not told my family, mainly because I do not think they will believe me and they will think I'm crazy. I think my dad could have possibly seen it or something else at one point too. Before I seen it, out of nowhere he started burning sage around the house saying that he liked the smell, even thought he has never said he liked it before and has never burned it here before. Now for some info about the land. In case anyone didn't know, the Wendigo is a Native American legend. They are a human who resorted to cannibalism and a Wendigo spirit took them over after they ate and turned them into this monster. I live in Kentucky. There were and still are Native Americans here. I find tons of flint every year on my family's land, the same land I seen it on, and an occasional arrowhead. They were definitely on my family's land. My mom has a lot of Native American blood in her, so that means I have some too. And now for the most important part of this story. Me and a friend who I have told this story just realized 2 weeks ago. There is a Trail of Tears site less than 5 miles away, just checked, it's actually just over 2 miles away, from my doorstep. It is entirely possible this thing could have came from that. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer best I can. Also, if anyone has any info that could help me determine what it was for sure or how to tell if it's still around, I'd appreciate it. It's been almost a year and I haven't seen it again. It's 2005. My daughter and I were visiting my papa after his quadruple bypass surgery. I set up camp for the two of us in the living room, which was on the opposite side of the house from his bedroom. My daughter was only 3 months old at the time, so I didn't want to run the risk of waking him during midnight feedings and whatnot. We're probably into the 3rd week of our visit. It's about 2 a.m. and a little one wakes up for a feeding. I change her, feed her, put her back to bed. I'm wide awake now, so I laid back down on the pull-out couch and turned on the TV. I'm about 10 minutes into a Roseanne rerun when I start to hear sounds coming from the dining room. Thinking it was my grandpa, I turned the volume down on the TV and called out to see if he needed anything. I didn't receive a response back, but now I can clearly hear the sound of rattling doorknobs. The dining room has double doors that open to the back deck. I sat up to look just beyond the kitchen into the dining room and there's no one there, but the doorknobs are still fucking rattling. This is when I start to freak the fuck out. Someone's trying to break into the house and we're all going to die. So what do? I curl into a ball on the bed because the sudden panic attack had taken over the ability to use my brain. Within seconds of curling into the fetal position, the doorknobs stop rattling. There's absolute silence. I swear I was laying there for what seemed like an hour, but it was probably only a couple of minutes. That's when I heard the footsteps. The living room and dining room are separated by a small kitchen. These footsteps started at the entrance to the kitchen from the dining room and made their way ever so slow and steady across the linoleum floor towards the living room, where I lay frozen solid, the hair standing up on my arms and back of my neck. They stopped just short of the living room. And that was it. No more noise. No more footsteps. Whatever it was never retreated back in the direction it had come from. There was nothing. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. My aunt in Mexico is a bruja, which, she is someone that is wealthy but acts dirt poor and no one messes with her. One year I decided to go down to my grandmother's hometown and learn more about where I'm from. My aunt was one of the many people that came to greet me. I gave everyone kisses and hugs and introduced myself. When I got to my aunt, she grabbed my hand and instantly I felt drained. I thought nothing of it since I just got off a 3-hour flight. I returned to my uncle's house to rest before going to meet more of my family members. As I was laying down, my head started to throb harder and harder. One of the worst headaches I have ever had. I took some Tylenol, but that didn't seem to help. I still went to visit family even though my head felt like a hammer was hitting it. I never believed in brujeria, I just knew about it. Over the course of my stay I kept getting sicker and sicker. Some days I couldn't walk, others I'd throw up. I just thought it was because I was in a different country and my body isn't used to it. One of my other uncles came to see me and I told him about it. He told me to come over to his house that afternoon and that he can make my sickness go away. I didn't really believe him because my uncle was a medicine man and I thought what he was talking about was fake. Boy, was I wrong. I went to his house and he made me choose an egg. He then performed this ritual on me where you rub the egg around your body to cleanse it. When he cracked open the egg, it was completely black. He said that someone put a hex out on me. He knew instantly who it was. Note, my uncle and my aunt that's a witch do not get along. After that, he walked me back to where I was staying because he didn't want her touching or talking to me. Once I was inside I heard them screaming at each other. That night, Guadalajara had one of the worst flood/thunder/lightning storms. I prayed and prayed all night that God would protect me from my aunt. I had sleep paralysis, but it wasn't a negative scared feeling, more like a caring and holding feeling. The next morning I awoke with no headache, sickness, and ready to take on the day. It was a scary experience and honestly don't wish it on my worst enemy.